Hey, what's up? Silas here. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about how the World Cup and international sporting kind of organizations and the way they're organized can kind of be transferred to actual politics and may be able to help the world in a way from transitioning from the current political systems that we have, the current state system that we have, that has a lot of corruption and embedded interests and things like this. And maybe you can actually get a situation where we have a better world for everyone. I'm personally more of an anarcho-capitalist, and that's more anarchy and capitalism. Anarchy is a kind of structure where there's no rulers and lawmakers that are above the law. I am completely okay with rules and laws. I like rules and laws. But the problem is in most countries, we have a political class that makes the laws but doesn't live by the laws. Simple example is the Affordable Care Act, known as Obamacare in the United States of America. It was passed in through the government, passed out to the people, but the congressmen themselves don't actually need, the congressmen and the senators who actually passed it and said everybody in the country has to go by it, don't have to go by that themselves. They get their own kind of insurance, they get their own kind of benefits in that kind of situation. So you have this kind of situation in Kenya where it's like, okay, you have certain tribes, somebody becomes a minister of a department of maybe the Minister of Lands, and then they're in maybe the Kalenjin tribe, and then they decide, let me hire all the Kalenjin people I can into this place, and they're not hiring on actual merit, they're hiring more on the tribalism, and then you get a situation where people are embedded in there, and even if those people want to do well, since they're not being hired on merit, they're not actually able to do as well as somebody else that may actually have the actual abilities to do that. So now, how does it happen in governments? I mean, in the World Cup, in Olympics and things like that. In the World Cup, it says, okay, we're going to take, for example, the Nigerian team. The Nigerian team is going to be staffed, it's going to have people from Nigeria, people who are actual Nigerian nationals. They're going to play in the place, and they don't necessarily only play in Nigeria. The best people in Nigeria probably play in Europe, probably play in, some people are playing in the United States of America now that league is going out. I think some people even go to South America, but they don't necessarily all play in Nigeria. But when it comes time to have the Nigerian team out there actually performing in something like the World Cup, international kind of situations, these players come back and they represent the team that way. So the people itself, the team itself, is staffed by actual Nigerians. Now, the coaches, the trainers, the people doing the exercise, as I said, these players are playing elsewhere. They're playing in other countries. They're learning. They're being trained by coaches and things in other places, getting nutritionists from other places and things like that. They actually get that kind of education and information and empowerment. Empowerment, that term is just being used in such a different way nowadays. But anyway, they're getting that kind of influence from those other countries. Then when it comes to the actual national team, when they're actually going to something like the World Cup, you could have a German coach there. And that German coach is not going to throw the match because he's German if he's playing Germany's team. No, the actual teams, the actual people in Nigeria looked around and said, look, we need a coach. And then people bid for the job to be the coach, and the best person out there end up getting the job, and then it's there for merit. So that person is taking that because he's interested in showing how good he is at coaching, at planning, at building up a team, at competing, and then he comes out and does that. And you see this often with CEOs. A CEO will work in a certain company. That company might not do well for whatever reason. Maybe it's the direct thing. Maybe the markets change. They lose that job. They move somewhere else and they hire there again. You see this happening in football all the time. Someone like Jose Mourinho, who else? Ancelotti, was it Pepe, the guy who was, is it Pepe? Guardiola, Pep Guardiola. I'm saying these names kind of off a bit. But these players go around. They move around. These coaches, I mean, they move around to different teams in different leagues because the amount of people in the world that can actually run a team at that level is very few. The amount of people I would imagine that can actually run a government, I mean, a ministry, run a system like that that's actually existing are very few. And they might be 500 people in the United States of America that can do that. But there's only 50 positions of that being done in the United States of America. So why don't you have a situation where in Kenya, somebody can just put out and say, okay, we have a Ministry of Energy. We're going to staff that thing. We're to hire Kenyans and things like that to build the power grid, to organize that, because there's constant brownouts and blackouts and things like that here in Kenya. You have that kind of situation and you say, okay, now we're going to bid out and anyone in the world can apply for the job of director of ministry, director of energy, and then they come in, even if it's a European, even if it's a Kenyan. I mean, if it's a Kenyan, if the Kenyan is most qualified, he can do it. It could be a European, it could be a Brazilian, it could be somebody from the Middle East. Now they could come in just like the coach can come in and coach a team. They could come in and coach that team and be the CEO of that team that's running an actual utility for the entire country. Is that making any sense? Now, I know there's some kind of complications here where people might be saying, oh, there's interest, maybe if you're getting into the power grid, there's issues of national interest being involved, where it's like, okay, there's some things that are very central to a country's sovereignty and a country's strength. So let me be the Ministry of Defense. You can't just be like, yeah, we're going to hire somebody from Somalia to be the top guy in the Ministry of Defense in Kenya and organize our military, when that guy could just up and leave and go back to Somalia, and then there could be some kind of war, some kind of actual conflict with Somalia, and that person knows everything. So there's that kind of situation where it's like, okay, what do you do in that kind of situation? But you see a similar situation also in sport teams. You have someone who's coaching a team, then they move to another team, and then it's like, okay, I kind of know these players, but the new coach comes in and he kind of changes those players around and they do something different. It's still the same personnel, still the same field, still the same rules, but they're working on different personnel. I mean, working on different kind of plans. So that's my kind of idea with this. I'm going to kind of flesh this idea out a little more, and I think I'm going to include it in that carbon idea, that's this animation video game storyline that I've had in my mind for some time. And this is part of the structure of how the countries or some regions in this reality, in that reality tunnel that I was thinking of, that would be an interesting way to kind of build the government around. So right now, I'm just put the idea out there. I'm probably going to come back in later and tweak different parts, but I just wanted to put it out there and have you guys kind of think of that. Do you think it's a positive thing? Do you think it's a possible thing? Because as I said, also, it's a situation where it's like, hey, if you're the best at something, if you've been doing really well at the Ministry of Energy here in Kenya, and then it's like, okay, I've come in, somebody from the United States of America comes here, takes over the ministry, and then they start looking at the Kenyans and it's like, yeah, this Kenyan is doing really good. This Kenyan is very good at setting up now power stations all over the world. I mean, all over Kenya and things like that. He's doing a really good job about that. Now, instead of me actually putting this person as the head person here, maybe that person has skills enough, then that person can actually now say, okay, I've set it up in Kenya enough. I have enough people around here, or the head guy here in Kenya is actually doing a good enough job. Now, since I want to get something higher, I can apply for the job maybe in the Central African Republic. And then he goes to the Central African Republic and they have the similar structure where they're actually hiring the people who are actually going out there, putting the lighting poles down, staffing the actual power stations and things like that. He can be like, okay, now I'm going to go in there and now plan for the Central African Republicans who are actually working. And that's a similar way how you see how a player can get really good under a coach from another country. And then that player is like, okay, we're going to pick this player and we're going to take this player to another country, and that player is actually going to coach or actually play on this other team. How in the World Cup you have situations where there's Nigerian people who move to another country and they maybe are born there, or their parents are Nigerian, they move to Germany, they have kids. I think the Boatengs are a good example. It might be two of them actually, and I think they were coming from either Angola or Nigeria, but now they're playing for the German national team. And there's no actual, there's no kind of situation where people like the Boatengs are going to throw the match if they actually play against Nigeria or Angola or whatever. People understand that this person has actually gone there. They're professional. They're playing for the country or for the team that they're playing on at that time. And I think this is a different way to kind of take advantage of the actual globalization that's occurring and still maintain some kind of national sovereignty and just have a sharing of resources and abilities without having the isolate. I don't want to just throw around these terms like isolationist and globalism and things like that. But yeah, I think the world is changing. We're getting to a situation where information is being shared in a different way. And I think information can cross borders without the people crossing borders necessarily, so somebody can still maintain their cultural integrity and their national identity, which I think is positive in a sense, And the people who live in those places are very much still very strong about that, yet they can still reap the benefits of the ideas and technology and advancements from other places and other cultures. So I definitely will need some attempts to condense this down into a more palatable way of talking about this. But this is an idea that I've had in my mind for some time, and I just want to get some of these ideas out there and have you guys kind of respond and let me know what you guys think about them. And then from there, I can build out and see what we make from it or what I can make from it. But yeah, thanks a lot for listening. Like, share, and subscribe. Links below to the merchandise store can help me out on Patreon. And I'll be doing a few more of these other videos where I kind of just get ideas out. And as I mentioned, I'm going to come back to this topic later as I kind of flesh it out and condense it into something else. Okay, goodbye.